You're very welcome to another episode of the Scaling Your Business podcast. This week, we're back again with Kel for another episode all around money. This specific episode focuses on cryptocurrency. What is it? Why might you invest? And all those good things. But Kel, you're very welcome back for another episode. I thought we'd focus on giving a recap of the first episode. So anyone who hasn't listened to the first episode, pause now and go listen to it. But we'll give a quick recap of what is money. Last week we spoke about the significance of Yap Island, stones to then fiat currency to trust. So can you give the listeners an idea of what is money?
Yeah, it's good to be back, Rian. I suppose a potted history of money, and I think it is really important to have a little bit of background on that before you even start looking into crypto, because crypto came out to solve a problem with money. So with money, most of us would be aware of at the very beginning of time, before we had paper, before we had digital, all of that, there was a bartering system. And that worked really well. If you had chickens and you wanted cows, and you could make a deal with the cow farmer and the cow wanted chickens, and all that worked out really well. But what would happen then if you wanted something, but they didn't want chickens, if you're a chicken farmer. And so you needed something that could store value that everybody agreed on that would be worth X amount. And they're all happy to use that in lieu of just straight bartering. And it just gave a common thing they could focus on. So actually, where you mentioned Yap Island, that was one of the first times we had the origin of currency, and they used these rice stones, these big, huge calcite stones that got bigger over time. They started off kind of as pebbles to exchange value, and because they loved these stones, and it was what everybody in the island believed was the most precious thing that they had. And they said, okay, well, this stone, well, that's worth a cow, and this is this. But what would happen is then, as bigger things would need, like if their crops failed, or if you wanted a dowry or a house, you needed bigger and bigger and bigger stones. And these stones got to a point where they were like the size of 2 cars, and it wasn't easy to transport. So over time, just to give the shorter version, money came in. We started dealing with, the rest of us started dealing with gold, and then money came in, and there was the gold standard, and then the gold standard was broken in 1971, which meant that currencies were free floating against each other. Because before that, you could go into a bank and say, hey, look, I got my note here, and I want to swap it for that exact amount of money. And the bank could go,
cool
sure.
Would that have been? That's pretty cool.
It was so cool. But by breaking from that, that meant that the banks didn't have to hold as much gold for a start, but it also gave governments the flexibility to print money, to make inflation go up or down or change it. And we trust to this day that our centralized governments, and this trust it has been well earned, and in general it has worked really, really well, but the centralized government will manage the money for us, and we the people trust that will happen. But unfortunately, sometimes this trust gets broken, and it's been broken in the last decade. I know we spoke about Zimbabwe the last time, and India, and there's Venezuela, I forgot to mention as well. Like, they're going through massive hyperinflation. And even with our own changing over from the punt to the euro, the punt is not currency anymore. So you can't use it as a currency because somebody made a decision that what is written on the coin is not worth what's written on the coin anymore, or it's not going to be used as a currency. But the thing with money, and this is where the crypto kind of comes into it, is that any transaction with money now, be it digital or paper, generally it has to go through a centralized system, because the money is printed in a central mint and it's sent out to you, or it's done digitally via your PayPal, your current account, or your online banking, and all of those things. But you need that third party, you need that centralized government, and you need to fully and implicitly trust that government for this to work. And because it's not always the case, and also because privacy becomes an issue, because with money, if you're going through a centralized third party who has full autonomy over what happens to this money, you lose your privacy. So every transaction that you make, it's seen there, it's stored, it's transacted, and they know that I, Kel, have given you, Rian, this amount of money for whatever it is. And it's
kept on a ledger, isn't it?
Yes, in a bank, it's kept on a ledger. And actually, you'll see a lot of similarities in a minute But that's the background to money. So what happened in the 1980s, these cyberpunks came along and they said, hey, well, we would like more privacy with our money, and we don't necessarily believe that you need the central government having all this power over this money that you work so hard to earn. They can print it and devalue it down to nothing. They can say this is worth 1,000 rupees now and it's worth nothing the next day. There was a lot of power in that, and that didn't go down with everybody. So these cyberpunks started talking about, well, what about a peer-to-peer currency? And that's what they started chattering in the 80s. And that's was the very, very starting of even the concept of a cryptocurrency. And it was even back as far as then that happened.
So don't want to give away my age, but this was happening before I was born, is what you're saying.
Yeah, during my childhood.
So cryptocurrency is the focus of today's episode. I think you've done a great roundup of what money is, the concept of money. Anyone wants a greater understanding, recommendation would be to buy Kel's book. Kel, you're an author of a book. As usual, we'll leave a link below to it. And that's where I learned all about the story of Yap Island. There's a great story about a rock at the bottom of an ocean that still is traded to today. But to learn more about that, go buy Kel's book. You can buy it from, I bought it from bookmark.ie, which is an Irish bookstore. I'm sure it's available on Amazon, Eason's, and all those other places as well, Kel.
Yeah, it is. Wherever books are sold, you can get it.
Excellent. So cryptocurrency, what is it?
That is the ultimate question, isn't it? I personally, I'm going to start off by giving the caveat. I'm not an expert. I am just somebody who's fascinated by what it is and what it represents and what it actually is versus what it's used for in mainstream are actually two very different things. And I suppose what I'll do is I'll continue on from where I was kind of mentioning a minute ago with regards to these cyberpunks who were trying to do something different, that they were talking about what if we had this decentralized currency where we could just, instead of going through a bank or through a brick and mortar or through whatever, it's straight from you to I. So you cut out fees, you cut out the regulation, and it keeps the power between the people as opposed to a government. And this is where it all started. And there were a few iterations of Bitcoin before Bitcoin even came out. There was Digicoin, and that was, if I remember, David Chaum, but that went bankrupt in 1998. There's the whole background with that. And there's a few people tried a few different things, but nothing really was secure enough, thorough enough, well thought through enough, until the paper from Satoshi Nakamoto was circulated around the cryptography, kind of their own little groups, excuse me, in 2008, yes. And this 9-page manifesto, for want of a better phrase, detailed this currency. And Bitcoin is a currency. Now, Bitcoin, I suppose I must say, needs to be differentiated from blockchain. So, but this is also one of the first places where blockchain was mentioned, and I'll go into that in a minute. And the reason it's important to understand blockchain before you go into Bitcoin is that blockchain is to Bitcoin what the World Wide Web is to the internet. The internet is simply an application that sits on top of the World Wide Web. So blockchain is the equivalent of the World Wide Web, and Bitcoin is simply an application that sits on top of it. And
so
it's actually,
if I pause you there for a moment.
Yeah, go on.
For this episode, I think my role is going to be that kid in the class that puts his hand up every 4 seconds going, can you explain what that means, please? If I got this correct, you're saying that the kind of concept was around late 80s, late 90s, but if I'm understanding it, did we need technology to be where it is today so that something like this could happen? Like if that white paper was created hypothetically in 1990, but the technology wasn't there to support it, would we be in the place we are now? Like, or is it only happening because of, you know, the 2008, 2009 years and the advancements in technologies over those 2 decades?
That is a brilliant question. And I don't know enough about computer science to give you a straight answer on that. However, the blockchain itself is written in C++. Now, C++ is one of the longer running languages. It's quite a robust one. And I won't go too deep into it because it's not everybody's cup of tea. But the beauty of this blockchain is that when Satoshi Nakamoto, and we don't even know if it's him or a her or a they, it's just this name. And
There's an Irish guy that could potentially be him. There's a list of 11 and one of them is Irish.
That it could potentially be. And it's fascinating because this Satoshi Nakamoto, and we'll pretend it's a person for the moment, if they have never ever once cashed in any of their Bitcoin, which shows massive restraint and massive pride in their work, I believe. Because if they were to cash in their Bitcoin now, they would be the richest person in the world.
Whoa, how many Bitcoin do they have?
I actually can't remember. It's
a lot. A couple of billion.
Yes. I actually can't remember off the top of my head. But if they were to cash in their Bitcoin, so this is all on the blockchain. So how the blockchain works, right? It's written C++, and the software actually is open source, so anybody can download the mining software from the internet and put it on their own computer and start mining. Now, there's reasons why you wouldn't necessarily do that now, but you can. But the beauty of it is the integrity in the code, the security in the code, the openness and transparency of that code that anybody can look at, but yet it still can't be broken. And this is why it was such a brilliant currency for the people, because everything about it was transparent. And how it actually worked, how it works is, if you were to do a transaction in a bank, everything, it goes on a ledger, right? Be it a digital ledger, and it used to be paper ledgers, and all transactions are there. So the bank would look and it would say, okay, well, Kel wants to buy this thing. Does she have the €100 or whatever in her current account? Yep, she does. She can go ahead and buy that. With Bitcoin, it's peer-to-peer, and they have ledgers. So Bitcoin, this blockchain actually has these ledgers built into it. And every 10, 15 minutes, a ledger is made. And in that ledger, all the transactions for Bitcoin go into it. But the thing is, it's not centralized like a bank would be. You have these nodes, and you could have potentially tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of nodes across the world at any place. It could be on somebody's home computer, or it could be one of the big, huge super stations where they mine Bitcoin. And if all these nodes don't agree that everything is absolutely correct, then it's kicked out. It doesn't happen. And once all these transactions come in, and there's a huge, big computational, massive, powerful set of computer problems that need to be worked out. Once they're worked out and everything in the ledger is correct and agreed by all these other nodes, that's when this hash is made and closed in. And a new ledger, so the ledger is within the hash, and a new ledger is opened up every 10 to 15 minutes. And each hash is attached to the next. And I kind of think of it like a train where carriages are stuck together. And every 10, 15 minutes, a new carriage is put on. And once this hash is completed, nobody can go in and change that. It is stuck. You cannot go back and rewrite history. If somebody tries to hack into it and go back to an earlier one, they'll be kicked out, because you have to get such a volume of nodes to agree at the same time. And if there isn't full consensus, it doesn't happen. So nice. That's what makes it so secure. It's massively secure. And this is, when it started out, the idea behind it was not that it was this store of value, like people are treating it like the new gold. It was purely so that we could use it as this currency that we could trade back and forth with our various monies. Am I going okay?
No. I'm trying to wrap my head around this. You've got it nailed down. What I'm trying to understand is, because I'm a slow thinker in comparison to most, is crypto. You're essentially saying, because I've got these words, ledgers and things. Crypto is essentially a digital currency that can be purchased with your own money via any of these
the exchanges. Yeah, there are a lot of exchanges out there now. Yeah.
Like, I know in Ireland we use Revolut. You can buy cryptocurrency in Revolut via your cash in Revolut. I think there's eToro, there's Robinhood, there's a couple of others that you can buy these cryptocurrencies on. And then if we've got understanding the core elements so far, there's crypto, and then that basically, if people think of like a digital token, like an arcade token, essentially. So they're giving their money, and in return they're going to be given a branded arcade token. And then there's the blockchain, which is the technology entire thing runs on.
Yeah.
and you've got a traditional bank which is centralized because it has some form of control. There's like the middle person, which in most cases is like the government or the people who print the money. And if I was to pay you, the bank take note of that on a ledger, which, if I understood this, is, for simplistic terms, it's basically like a piece of paper. Rian's paid Kel €100, and then if Kel pays someone else, it's put on, and then they can only do so many transactions on a piece of paper that then a new piece of paper is created, which is a different. If you go to Bitcoin, it's also noted Rian paid Kel 2 Bitcoin, Kel paid Paul 2 Bitcoin, and they can only fill up so many transactions on a block that when it's full. And I was doing research before we joined it. There's approximately 2,700 transactions take place in each block. Yeah. They create a new block. And if I understood, you've used the word hash, not a drug. Hash is the code that links one block to another block to another block, because they can only have so many limited transactions on each block. And hash is like a code that talks to the previous block that says, this is what was on the previous piece of paper, and then this is what was on the previous piece of paper. And you were saying it's so secure that if someone attempted to come in, let's say we've got 10 pieces of paper lined up, if someone attempted to come in and rob paper number 3, they couldn't do that because they all have to agree what's going on. If they don't all agree, like if one flag something's going off, they're going to be stopped from pulling or robbing that piece of paper, or essentially in digital way, they're going to be stopped from taking that, hacking that blockchain or that ledger, if I understood correctly. So when you see me looking kind of confused or dazed, I'm just trying to process the whole thing.
Yeah, look, it took me a while to get my head around, because it is a new technology and it's a new way of thinking about money. And the thing is, like you said, if somebody did come in and try, for example, rob Ledger 3, that would actually negate all the subsequent blocks in that blockchain. Okay. So it can't actually be done. It wouldn't just be, oh, that block's gone missing, where's it gone? It would, if everything is green and good, it just turns everything red straight off.
So let me ask you this then. If we had, and just for me, we had pieces of paper as ledgers or blocks, can someone see that Rian owes, like, is the because if you go into a bank, maybe it might say Rian paid Kel, Kel paid Paul. On a blockchain, does it say Rian paid Kel? From my understanding, there's some code attached to your name, so your name is never seen.
Yes, and this is where the privacy side comes in, which was one of the big things with Bitcoin as well, and cryptocurrencies in general. It was to get privacy back and get autonomy back in between people. So when you buy Bitcoin, for example, there are 2 keys. There is the public key and the private key. And the public key allows you and I to look at the blockchain and look at Bitcoin and go, there's that transaction there now that is proof to the world that I gave you 2 Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Now, people don't know it's you and I.
Just see a lot of digits.
Correct. Now, you who received that 2 Bitcoin off me, and me who sent that Bitcoin to you, I have a private key, you'll have a private key. And it is only through that private key can you access your money. And your name will never be attached to it. It doesn't have to be. But if the world can see the one key, and you have access to your actual money with the other key.
And those 2 keys talk to one another to protect your identity.
Correct. Yeah.
Gotcha.
To the best of my language skills to describe this, because I'm not an expert. I just find it fascinating. I've read a lot about it and investigated a lot into it. So there could be somebody out there who is very, very much an expert in Bitcoin who could get the nuances a bit better. But that's pretty much what you're looking at. And this can be a frustration to kind of governments or any of the regulators, because they can't see that I've transferred the equivalent of money to you, because if they can't see that, then they can't tax it or charge it or follow it or anything like that. And that is a frustration. But what it does then, it allows basically the full value of me sending 2 Bitcoin to you to arrive to you at that full value without charges and all that sort of thing. And if you don't know who has what money, then you can't follow it or inflate it or deflate it or print more of it.
Yeah,
exactly.
So you've mentioned a potential frustration on behalf of the government. There's probably some other concerns or frustrations around there with focusing on crypto, or you could even focus on Bitcoin as an example that people might be familiar with. Probably best actually stating that Bitcoin is one of several thousand cryptos. When I did a Google search yesterday, there's over 4,000 different cryptos. Might be familiar with some. I know there's Ethereum, there's Litecoin. I'm sure you're familiar with a couple of other ones that are out there, but there's over 4,000. But the most popular one is either Ethereum or Bitcoin.
Yeah. And now actually there's a difference between Bitcoin and all the others.
Okay.
So Bitcoin is a currency in itself. The others are altcoins. Alternative coins, I think, is the abbreviation for it. And there's a key difference in how it's mined and how you get them. And this is one of the concerns around crypto and specifically Bitcoin. So when you're mining, or when anybody is mining Bitcoin, there's a lot of computing power, and the stakes get higher and higher with the more Bitcoin that's out there and the more Bitcoin that's mined, because there's only 21 million Bitcoin in total, and there's only about 2 million left to be mined. But you'll see the cost going up, because actually the cost of mining, the computing power and the server size and complexity that you need to do it at this stage is really, really high. And that's heavy on the environment, to the point where there are many of the bigger mining companies have located up to huge big rivers and dams in the middle of cold areas of the planet to keep the heat down, because these servers generate a lot of heat, but also to use the hydropower, because they would just drain grids way too fast. But for the Bitcoin particularly, it is very high energy intensive, and all this computing power for nothing more than a digital coin. And that can cause concern. And
for sure.
But to mine that, it's called proof of work. And that's really energy intensive. But with the altcoins, and I believe it's pretty much all the rest of them, you need proof of participation, which is different, and it's not as intensive from a computer perspective. So they're actually easier and cheaper and simpler to mine than Bitcoin is. They are different. So just going back to the internet sitting on the World Wide Web, and the World Wide Web can hold so many different things. We assume they're the same thing, but they're not. So these altcoins are sitting on the blockchains, the equivalent of the World Wide Web, but they work slightly differently. And Ethereum is a really, really good one. Ethereum could be a massive one in the future, because for ways that you mightn't necessarily think, Ethereum was designed for contracts. Now think of all the contracts you've worked through in your entire life, from buying a house, from any kind of legal stuff, all that thing. And if you think of the blockchain, like we were saying, once it's in there and it's noted, it's not changed. So you could buy a house in about 2 or 3 minutes using Ethereum or blockchain technology.
Wow.
And it's your house, and we agree, and the money is sent over, and it's there on the ledger forevermore that Kel sold Rian a house. There you go. And you cut out all the time and the middlemen and everything. It's a long way down the road, but it is very, very possible.
Well, just like the internet was in its infancy 3 decades ago, and people were confused by that, it takes time to get comfortable and used to the way people pay for things. You know, now I went into Tesco this morning to get a coffee, and I paid with just tapping on my phone, whereas 20 years ago that was non-existent. 10 years ago that was non-existent in Ireland.
Yeah.
You might have heard me tap it away. I wanted to get some data. 2 things I searched. One was to give people an idea of the market cap for both Bitcoin and Ethereum being the 2 most popular coins. Bitcoin, 735 billion.
Yeah.
And Ethereum, 324 billion. You touched on energy. Can you take a guess? There is a country that if you combine all the energy that it takes to mine these coins, it beats one of these specific countries in the world for more energy. And it is Argentina. It's not a small country, Argentina.
That's a big country.
Yeah. So that shows you how much stress or
it's the computing power that's required. Like if somebody's ever interested, you can look on YouTube. There's loads of videos of these huge big stations, and you can see it walking through, and the hum of the noise of these servers, and there could be thousands of servers. That's how complicated the maths is to create this. But what it does as well, though, it helps keep the system clean, and I'll explain that a bit more, and that's my words on it, not any other words. To incentivize the the integrity and security of the Bitcoin and the blockchain it sits on, you need to make sure that it is managed properly by the miners, and to incentivize the miners to get better and more proficient and faster, they earn coins. So that every 10, 15 minutes, we're saying when a new hash is made, before the next ledger is open, to start the next hash, like these hubs, and that's why it's probably not going to be to your benefit to download onto your normal computer now, because we've way surpassed that from a computing perspective. But
my computer can barely cope with iMovie, so I'll pass.
Like, no, back in 2008, 2010, even up to maybe 14, you could mine these on your normal laptop, because the maths was relatively simple compared to what it is now. When you think about the size of the servers you need every 10, 15 minutes rotating through all of this. But they get their 2 or 3 Bitcoin now, whereas initially you might have gotten 50 Bitcoin back in 2010, or when it came, at the very, very beginning. So they need to be able to cover their costs to do this. So it's self-cleaning system insofar as they need Bitcoin to be a certain amount, and it's worth it to them to keep it going.
Yeah, of course.
But in saying that, and this is not to worry people, if the Bitcoin price drops, well, then that will actually bring new players into the market, because it's still going to be lucrative to mine these Bitcoins. And then the price will go up again, and the stakes get higher and higher and higher with it.
Okay.
So if somebody is particularly environmentally conscious, potentially Bitcoin may not be for them. And that's because I know that is a big thing. But if you are still interested, the altcoins wouldn't be as energy intensive.
Yeah. Okay.
Who would have thought we'd get onto environmental things talking about Bitcoin, eh?
No, it's great. I'm just trying to wrap my head around this whole thing. It just confuses me in the directions. We're talking about altcoin and Bitcoin at the moment. You've mentioned to create a new block. It happens every 10 to 15 minutes on Bitcoin. Considering we're talking about concerns and frustrations, energy, government, the frustrations of the government. One of the other things is now that we're talking about, let's say, Ethereum and Bitcoin, one of the other differences is, why is Ethereum becoming so much more popular and gaining traction compared to Bitcoin? And you touched on a thing, you said to create a new block takes 10 to 15 minutes. That's rather slow, whereas with all these others, it's much faster. I've done some maths on this. Each block of Bitcoin can hold 1 megabyte of transactions. Touched on earlier on, there's 2,700 roughly transactions on a block, which is the piece of paper that we referenced. And it takes 10 minutes to generate a new block. So if we go, there's 2,700 transactions on a block, and every block takes 10 minutes to generate a new one. That means that Bitcoin can do 4.6 transactions per second. If we compare that to the likes of Visa or MasterCard, who can do 24,000 transactions per second, it is rather slow. So these other things like Ethereum are much faster at doing transactions than Bitcoin, which is another reason why they are becoming popular, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't have all the answers on this, but if you remember, I mentioned earlier about proof of work versus proof of participation. Mm-hmm. And it's like chalk and cheese. You're looking at 2 very different workloads from a computing perspective, because all of this is built on a mixture of maths, computer science, and cryptography. And proof of participation is much lighter and faster. And because most things that are lighter, they're faster and more nimble. And also you have to remember that Bitcoin has an absolute finite amount. There is an end date on when.
You said 21 million?
21 billion, 21 million. Oh, goodness.
It's a lot.
It is 21 million Bitcoins. That's it.
21 million. Okay.
21 million Bitcoins.
And there's roughly 2 million left to farm.
Roughly 2 million left. See, Bitcoin was designed as a currency. The altcoins, and even though we see them all and we call them all digital currencies, each altcoin will have its own little superpower, for want of a better phrase. And Ethereum is because it includes contracts. You can transfer massive assets very, very quickly if you choose to do so with it. Now, a lot of people will buy it and use it as a store of value. And that's what's happening with Bitcoin. It's instead of it being used as a currency, and this is a concern with it, it was designed as a currency. It was designed to be used and transferred and as a day-to-day, just like we use our euros. But what has happened for loads of different reasons, it's now been used as a store of value, and it's been treated more like gold than an actual currency, which is not necessarily what it was designed to do. So it's hard to know how things will play out, because if you look back at text messages, when text messages came out, way before your time, Rian, I remember when text messages came out, and the phone providers didn't think much of text messages. They thought, oh, well, look, it'll help people, or just, guys working in the background just to send a quick message, like a pager kind of thing.
Yeah.
But text message took off in a way that nobody ever imagined that it would, in a direction nobody ever imagined that it would, because the text became the beginnings of what social media is. Because WhatsApp came on and Viber came on, and they got more sophisticated, and emojis came on, and GIFs came on, and then we could do videos, then we could call, and then all these things just grew from an idea that nobody really thought much of.
That's a great way of looking at it.
Yeah, well, it's how I kind of make sense of these things in my head. And I think Bitcoin, the idea behind it was idealist, and for a fundamental change and give power back to the people in a really secure way. But now it got a bad reputation because the privacy was taken advantage of with, and people would have probably know the Silk Road and just nefarious things that you don't necessarily want to be associated with. And that left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths. But the idea behind it wasn't for that. The idea behind it was, as we were saying earlier, to give us our privacy back and give people power over their own money. That was the idea. But now it's a cross between, in some people's minds,
drugs,
nefarious activities, exactly, and other people's minds, oh, this is the new gold. And trying to square that off, we're kind of in the mix of that at the moment. And I don't know actually what Bitcoin will become. And it's hard to know, because from what it started off being to what it is to what it will be, they're all very different things.
There's so many you put it greatly there with the comparison of text message and how that has evolved into different things. So there's so many different types of coins, not just Bitcoin. If someone was potentially thinking about investing or has invested, how would you think? Because I think I said there was like 4,000 different types of cryptocurrency. Like,
yeah,
how can I protect myself, or what are the steps I should make? Naturally, I would assume that 4,000. First thing I'd do is I'd check out the company myself to see who are there any other big investors that have invested in this, who actually owns the company, who's promoting it. Are they just trying to pump and dump? Several different things like that. One thing that's quite common actually that I read up on the other night was sometimes these cryptocurrencies or things that people are promoting aren't actually even developed. So the company themselves are looking to raise money so they can develop said name of whatever they've come up with. So definitely, if you're looking to protect yourself, it's do a fair bit of research on any of the alternative coins that you might not be familiar with. Ethereum, relatively safe. Bitcoin, but any of the other 3,900, I'd certainly protect myself.
Yeah, it is. It is hard to know, right? And hindsight gives 20/20 vision. Like, so many people are saying, "Oh, why didn't I mind my couple of Bitcoin, or why didn't I invest when it was 39 cents or whatever?" You could not have predicted how this would have gone, right? For all the reasons we just explained, and a huge amount of altcoins have jumped on the bandwagon. Some have massive integrity, some are, like you mentioned, pump and dump, and differentiating between them can be very, very difficult. But the way I would kind of view things is, like, if you were investing in a good company, you will look at the background, exactly like you're saying, Rian. You will say, if it is legitimate, it's going to be there for the long term. So if you do miss it when it's below €100 and it goes up to 1,000, whatever the altcoin is, you're still going to be good at 1,000 if it is what it says it is, and it is as sturdy and as secure and structured as what it said it is. And getting rich quick is more gambling than anything. And I would caution anybody who is looking to get rich quick, either massively do your research or potentially sit back and see as things unfold. Or if you really want to dip your toe, use your sandbox money. That couple of percent of your portfolio that you want to just take a punt on, that little kind of little elf inside you that just needs to just have that risk.
Yeah.
But keep it to that. Do not put your life savings in it. Do not do anything like that. It's sandbox money, in my opinion, at the moment, until it has proven itself more.
I 100% agree with you. I feel like there's probably cases out there of people who have put their life savings in this and are now probably crying. But definitely put money that you're willing to say, I'm okay if I never see this again type of money, you know? So whether that's, you can afford to put €100 in every month and you want to deposit it monthly to go in as it grows and dips and grows and dips. But just be aware that you may never see that €100 again. On the flip side, because it's so volatile, that €100 may turn into 10 grand. Who knows? But just be aware that you might not see it again.
And this is the thing. I was looking at some of the longer term graphs with Bitcoin. And with a lot of these new technologies, when they come out first, there's a massive amount of volatility. The early adopters take a huge risk on anything that comes out really, really early. But now that that was 2008 when it came out, the white paper, and the first Bitcoin was mined shortly after that. So we're into 2021 now. So it's just over 10 years old. Like, it's still relatively new, but the volatility of Bitcoin has dropped a huge amount in that space of time. Now, I know it's gone up to very high amounts of money, but if somebody, and I'm not encouraging people to buy it by any manner of means, because for me personally, it is very much a punt at the moment. But at the same time, the volatility is lowering in it.
Yeah. I've got an interesting, funny story that you might enjoy. I have a friend called Gareth Flower. He owns a company called Park Office. He's actually over in New York at the moment. He used to own Crust Bakery in Dublin, so they used to supply a lot of like the croissants and donuts and whatnot to Tesco, and they had their own bakery. And they were the first people to like create the concept of a cronut, like a croissant and donut.
Yes.
They did this so they could get some press. So they can raise awareness of Crust Bakery, KRUST, if anyone wants to check it out. Gareth is not involved in it anymore, but one of the other things he did to create some kind of press was to accept Bitcoin as a form of payment. So here's the funny part, right? So I don't know what summer it was. He accepted, and he's a listener to this show, so I hope you don't mind me telling this story, Gareth. But I know he's done a YouTube video on it as well, so I'm sure he's fine with it. And he accepted Bitcoin as a form of payment when, I don't know what year it was, let's say 2012, 2013, when there was a bit of hype around it originally, and then it kind of died that period. And he got something like €5,000 or €6,000 over like a 6-month period and you can watch the video for the true facts of accepting Bitcoin. And then kind of the hype of it died down, and he was sitting there with about €5,000 to €6,000 worth of Bitcoin in their system. And the hype had died down, and they're like, oh, what will we do with this? So him and his friends decided for the summer to use it to buy beer and pizza, to spend the summer just traveling, buying beer and pizza. And then I was chatting to him like a couple of months ago about this, and he said that if he had kept that, the current value wouldn't be 5,000, it would be €965,000.
You can never know the future.
Mm-hmm.
Could have been.
I hope you enjoyed the pizzas and beers.
Actually, when you mentioned pizza there, it was there's a day, and it's called Bitcoin Pizza Day, and it was the 22nd of May 2010, and it was the first time that Bitcoin was ever used for a transaction for goods. And it was a guy who had mined Bitcoins, and I can't remember exactly how much he paid for these pizzas, but he bought his pizzas in Bitcoin. And that was, for him, just making this decision one time to do it, he legitimized accidentally Bitcoin as a currency by buying these pizzas. And that was the 22nd of May 2010. And you could nearly argue that that was the day that Bitcoin really started properly with people, because it made it the currency it said it was.
That was probably more expensive pizza than Gareth paid for. So,
I'd
Gareth,
say
if you're listening, there's
Feel
someone
better.
worse. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it worked out that something like it set the price, and I could be corrected on this, something like 39 cent as an American cent per Bitcoin.
Okay.
So that's what
at the time, yeah.
At the time, imagine that now, huh? Very expensive pizzas.
Yeah, for sure. couple of people might be wondering about potentially investing in crypto. I did some research. 4 things I've got down here. First is low transaction fees, but that's not the case in all cases. This is what I'm reading a quote out here that I took. For initial transactions, you'll pay about the same amount for both PayPal and Bitcoin. PayPal is an example of another transaction that people won't be familiar with, but PayPal has an edge. When you sell your Bitcoin for a fiat currency, government issued currency like the dollar, you'll pay another fee. Meanwhile, on PayPal, you'll only pay a fee when you initiate the transfer. So there can be low transactions, but not in all cases. So that's one reason why you might consider. Second reason is high reward. In brackets, I have high risk, so volatile. Third reason is transactions are quick, permanent, and hard to fake. This eliminates a lot of fraud issues that banks potentially deal with. Yeah, and then the other one is, you mentioned 21 million. There's a set amount that will ever be created. So 4 potential reasons why you might consider getting into it. But again, be advised to do your own research on that. I've just done a bit of research, and I'm bringing you what are some of the popular answers are on why other people have decided to get involved in it. I know that recently China cracked down on Bitcoin. Or cryptocurrencies in itself, and I think they made it illegal in Beijing to use cryptocurrency as a form, or maybe just Bitcoin as a form of transactions.
Yeah, and on one hand, you'll have funds been set up, hedge funds otherwise, that are all Bitcoin, a blockchain, and on the other hand, you'll have and some banks are starting to make up, and I think Facebook is looking at having its own cryptocurrency and things like that. And on the other hand, then you'll have, like, it'll be CISOs. You'll have, oh no, we're going to outlaw this, we're not going to have it. And then on the other hand, you'll have, oh no, we're embracing it now, and we're actually making our own version of it on the blockchain. So it is so hard to predict this at the moment, because back in 2017, the first time Bitcoin hit a really big high, and in euros, about 15,000 euro per Bitcoin. And then in about 48 hours, it dropped down to 7. And now,
holy moly,
it went up as far up into the 50s. It was $63,000, so whatever that would be in euros, in the 50s in euro, and now it's dropped back to 31. So you do have to have the stomach.
That would give me a heart attack just paying attention to that.
We see, and that's why it's not for everybody, and that's why it should only be, if you are doing this, sandbox money. It should only ever be money, like you said, that you are willing to say goodbye to and never, ever, ever have again. And if somebody is considering this as a long-term investment, and it may very well work out to be a fantastic long-term investment, you often will go through an exchange. There are various brokers and things, online brokers. But I would advise that anybody who's doing that and planning on long-term mining of Bitcoin, storing it as value, treating it like gold, like an investment, have your own external wallet. And don't leave it on the exchange.
Don't forget about your password either.
And this is the thing, when somebody has their wallet, their external wallet with all their seed codes and stuff like that, kind of just keep it in your mind. That wallet doesn't actually hold the Bitcoin. What it holds is that private key, that key we were talking about earlier, that unlocks the door to your Bitcoin. And if you lose that private key, there is no resetting that password. It is gone. It is absolutely gone. Yes. So you need to be very, very careful with how you store and keep that private.
Funnily enough, actually, it was the night before last, there was a power cut out in our house, and I forgot the code to my alarm in my apartment. My girlfriend was back at her parents. We were speaking around before this, and I was alone, and I was like, oh God, I don't know the code. My girlfriend's asleep. It's like 2:00 in the morning, and this alarm is ringing, and I hadn't saved the code anywhere. So, and I couldn't wake her up. So I was just sort of sitting there for 25 minutes, waiting for the alarm to turn off itself. Still don't know the code. I probably should find that out. But
that wasn't really the learning it needed to be, was it?
No, it wasn't. Which is probably why I'm probably one of the uncommon people who hasn't invested in any cryptocurrency. 2 places I prefer to invest in are my pension from my company, so it's before tax, and then A dynamic fund is another place. So might be worth another episode to discuss those things. But I prefer to do that. Not as high risk and not as volatile. Again, definitely with your research if you're considering either of those, the dynamic fund or anything like that. But certainly, if I can't remember the code of my alarm, I'd probably forget the code to my wallet. So
and there's a lot of Bitcoin locked away that people don't and won't ever have access to again, because the security on this stuff is just that good. It's genius in how it's done. But it's one of those things where you need to take ultimate responsibility if you are going to be investing in Bitcoin, because if you lose it, that's it, it's gone. And there's, I'm sure a lot of people will be aware of the story of the guy in England. And I remember it hit the news when Bitcoin started gaining traction from a monetary perspective. And he had his keys on his old laptop. And I believe it was his wife had dumped that laptop. And it's in the landfill, whatever part of the UK he's in. It's definitely worth a Google, because he came back in the news recently and he had offered the local council a really big chunk of what the Bitcoin on that laptop would be worth if he found it. He was trying to get them to dig back through 7 or 8 years of landfill waste to get his laptop back out, because it's worth millions at this stage.
That's...
Be super careful with these things. And if somebody does want to read more, actually one of the easiest and more informative books I've ever read actually was a book, it's called Bitcoin, it's got the namesake, by Dominic Frisby. Now it came out in about 2014 and I read it a couple of years afterwards, but it's definitely worth a read to get the background and to understand it. And it would be a really good starting point if somebody is interested or wants to learn more and kind of cut through a lot of the heavy jargon and stuff, and understand what it is and make a better educated decision of, well, is this for me or not? So I found that to be good.
I'll leave a link to that below. Definitely worth being patient and doing your research before you make any sudden jumps into this. I'd like to summarize kind of what we went through today. So you started with a recap of what money was. Anyone wants to kind of get a full understanding of that, leave a link to your book below. But today's kind of episode was focusing on 3 main areas: the what of crypto, the how does it work, and the why might I potentially invest. So in terms of what crypto is, you explained very well that essentially it's just a digital currency. Think of it as you use your own fiat currency, dollar, euro, to pay for a specific, in my example, was an arcade token that you have access to. Then there's the blockchain, which is, if we think of it in simple terms, a ledger as a piece of paper where notes are taken on who pays who. So if I pay Kel 2 Bitcoin, that's taken down on the ledger. Each ledger can hold up to 2,700 transactions, and then another ledger is created. So they're called blocks. And as each block's created, there is a hash. And a hash is a code that links one block back to the previous block. They cannot be hacked, because for each new transaction that's made on the ledger or block, it has to, all the other transactions have to agree that this is a legitimate transaction. So incredibly secure. And that's kind of what blockchain is. Everyone has their own private key and public key. The public key is so that you can go on and look to see what transactions are made. The private key is your own key that you have, and the two of them talk to one another to identify that a certain transaction has taken place. Is my understanding of what crypto is, how it works. Use any of the apps like Coinbase, Revolut if you're in Europe, Robinhood, eToro. There's about 4,000 different cryptocurrencies. I'm sure there's been 1 or 2 more created since we've recorded this.
Probably.
Some of the concerns about it was particularly energy. You touched about how some of the people who are mining it have moved to a colder climate so that it's not as, what would you say, not as...
the servers generate so much heat, and actually to keep their, I don't know if it's necessary to keep their impact down, but rather than having in big cooling units in the buildings, they just moved to a colder place and potentially, hydropower, and they basically rig up their own electric station to their servers. And it's a clever way of doing it, because hydropower in itself is renewable, which makes it better, and you're not adding with the natural cold of some of those areas. It is, even with all the computing power, you are kind of keeping the carbon footprint down a little bit. Not ideal in any shape or form, because at the end of the day, computing power is just used to make a Bitcoin. It's not used to cure an illness or anything. But at the same time, it's much more beneficial to do that than hook into a town's grid who is maybe burning oil and coal.
Interesting you say hydropower, because I had one of my previous guests on probably 2 weeks ago, was the former CEO of Board Gosh, John Mullins, now the CEO of Amarenco. He, amongst another couple of people that I've spoken to since having spoken to him, say that if we can nail it, hydrogen cars are the way of the future, not electric cars. It's interesting that you bring up hydro as a point. And then we went on to some of the other things of how you can protect yourself. You mentioned just basically be thorough, do your research, and think before you act. And then the why are they so popular? Why might I consider investing? High reward but high risk, quick transactions, and there's a limited number. So if you can get in,
anything that's scarce, like gold is scarce, therefore gold is valuable. Platinum is scarce, platinum is valuable. So Bitcoin is scarce. Some of the other altcoins don't necessarily have that as one of their unique selling points, but Bitcoin definitely does. And that's one of the reasons why it's been stored so much, because there is a finite amount. It was set out from day one. It's a finite amount.
And there's a couple of million in some landfill in England.
Yeah. So if anybody wants to take a hiking trip with a difference, there you go.
Yeah. Well, I've certainly understood it a bit more. And again, episode number 2 with Kel. I've had a great pleasure again with you. Look forward to what future topics we discussed, but I hope people have got a better understanding or their head wrapped around of what this cryptocurrency new age thing actually is.
Yeah. And hopefully some of the I know we're finishing up now, but one last little point.
Far ahead.
Chunk of the hype around Bitcoin, because you're trying to balance between the idealists of, this is a currency that we should be using, versus the investors. With a lot of the investing side of things around crypto in general, and this is a caution, I think, for people, is there is this massive fear of missing out, this FOMO going on, whereas if I don't get on the cryptocurrency bandwagon, if you can try and make yourself as immune as possible from that FOMO, because it will only be time that will tell us what currency, if any at all, is going to work out or not. But getting on it with the hope of getting rich may not be the most prudent use of your money.
And listen to, that's, how do I say this without sounding ridiculous? There's a few people on social media who are just promoting a coin so that they can make money, like drive up the general interest around a certain coin so that they can cash out and have made a couple of million, and they're not in it for you. So again, do your research and be careful before you jump in. Ask yourself, like, what do they really know about crypto itself?
Correct. And the final kind of thing from me, blockchain is genius. This is my opinion. It is absolute genius. I do think it is the way for the future. I don't know what that will look like yet. And I think if we start understanding it a bit better as a general rule, we can start using it properly, and life could be so much more fluid. And just even like receiving Ethereum for transactions and for sending money back and forth, it's amazing in its security, its privacy, its efficacy, its efficiency. But it just remains to see how we choose to use it.
Agreed. It's still in its infancy. It's funny because there's plenty of studies coming out that like social media itself is still in its infancy, and that's probably 2 decades old at this stage, and we're still early days yet, not really fully understand how to kind of get a grasp or get a handle of like what that mammoth of a thing is. And crypto itself is even younger than that. So maybe our kids will will get their head wrapped around this faster than we will.
And treat it more for what it was supposed to be, as opposed to I need to get my crypto now, quick. Everyone else is getting it. Everyone else is going to be rich. Everybody else is not going
but
to be
that's the
rich.
thing. It can be. I remember when I was a young kid, my first phone, a Siemens phone, and I used to be. My second phone, I can't remember what it was, and I had internet, and I used to just buy these songs on the phone that were costing like €5 a song, and it was taking money out of my dad's bank account, and he was furious. Whereas now, if you go on the phone and have Revolut, you don't need to seek permission from anyone. You can just go and buy crypto, and if you're easily influenced by any of these online people, that you can buy it like as fast as I click my fingers. So could potentially be worrying, but do your research.
Yeah, I think anything like this, and I know everybody says do your research. It's like you get a new appliance, a new washing machine, people say read the instructions, and nobody ever does. You've been warned now by us. But do try and read widely and get many people's opinions from the best quality place you can. Like for what Rian and I, what we've been talking about, like it's a jumping off point, and it's just to give people a bit more of an insight as to what it is and demystify some of the things around it. But it is a jumping off point for anybody, and we're just two people who are really, really interested in Bitcoin.
Absolutely. 100% agree. Best way to put it is there's no silver bullet to financial freedom or building an incredibly successful company takes decades to do. Yeah. You talk to any of those who are successful, a lot of them have to forfeit time elsewhere that they might want to spend, family vacations, other things. There is no silver bullet, no matter what people tell you, no matter what you see online. What people portray online is a completely different scenario sometimes to what their actual real life is like. So if anyone tells you that it's a quick get rich scheme, that's a sign for a red flag in your head.
Yes, actually there was a quote I read recently, and it was it took me 8 years to become an overnight success.
I couldn't agree more. There's it's phenomenal. I've been lucky to surrounded by a lot of successful business people, but they'll tell you themselves. Some of them have broken marriages because they focus so heavily on their business. Some of them have missed important occasions in their life because they focus too heavily in the business. I'm not for that, but I can tell you that it wasn't an overnight success with them, and they didn't just click their fingers. What was the equation for success? Luck meets preparation. So if you are in a situation but you're prepared, you can have a greater chance of becoming successful. The best way to do that is to put yourself in more situations with being prepared that you could strike luck. So networking is an incredibly key part of landing it, because the more you network and are prepared and have your 30-second pitch down and your talk nailed and prepared yourself, the higher chance of luck is going to strike if you put yourself in more of those situations. And sometimes that's what happens to people that have made it, that they got that lucky moment. But it's not just luck, it's because they had their shit together and they were prepared at the same time. So take it from me and several other people that, you're seeing all these great stories of like, well, it's not so great that someone left it in a landfill, and that someone went and spent 5,000 on pizza and beer and now it's worth almost $1 million. But there's plenty of great stories and hype around Bitcoin. On the other side, there is no silver bullet. But I know we've been saying that for the past 5 minutes, but I say that because I don't want someone to go out and make a decision and be easily influenced by anyone online.
Yeah, absolutely. The phrase that is, the more you practice, the luckier you get. So the more research you do, the more you understand it, the better your educated guesses will become. And Bitcoin could be your thing that makes your money, but it will only be that if you put in all that groundwork and understand it and know what you're doing. And even at that, we don't know enough about the technology to guarantee any form of real success.
We'll leave it there for this episode. Look forward to the next episode. But for now, thanks, Kel.
Great being here, Rian.